Dr. Alan Mendoza. Great to have you back on the programme, Alan.
Hello, Alex.
Let's appraise the 20-point peace plan, the announcement of the ceasefire today, and be quite sanguine about it. Do you think this is going to work?
Well, let's look at it from the following point of view. Nobody thought we could get to this stage very quickly, and so Donald Trump has exerted the awesome power and influence of the USA and his own unorthodox diplomacy to get us to this point, which, again, nobody thought was possible. So I'm going to say that we'll certainly get through phase one. I think there will be the full hostage return. I think the Israelis will withdraw to where they have said they will withdraw to, and I think there will be a surge of humanitarian aid. The bit that we're, of course, uncertain about is whether that ceasefire ends up turning into a real and lasting peace. And that will rely, obviously, on Hamas leaving and decommissioning their weapons, and then somebody else taking over and running Gaza. So we've got that bit to sort of consider. And that's, I think, the part that everyone is still waiting to understand how it'll work.
Do you know how America managed to sort of cajole and coordinate the sort of so-called Hamas refuge states, Turkey, Qatar and Egypt, into playing their part in speaking to Hamas and saying, right, you've got to step down now?
Yeah, I think it was really just, banging the fist on the table, on the one hand, saying enough is enough, we're fed up of this now, it's gone on too long. And secondly, suggesting there are ways past this conflict to enrich those countries. So in the Egyptian case, obviously, American military aid is key to the regime staying in power. I'm sure more has been promised there. In Qatar, there's been, of course, the constant issue of what happens with the Qatari regime in terms of its acceptability in the West. And so although everyone talks of Qatar as an ally, we all know it's only an ally because of its money, basically. And so the challenge there is to say to them, right, we can bring you in properly if you're willing to drop all this extremism support, and we can integrate you into what's going to happen in the region. And for Turkey, it's a case of, again, some money coming their way, but also a sense that you will have a seat now at the table of the future of the Middle East. And I think it's really about saying, forget about the past, forget about the present, let's look to build a future where all of you benefit and we benefit too. And Trump was the guy who could carry that across the line.
If you don't mind me asking, Alan, this is a story that sort of dropped on my desk recently that I want to talk to you about, and actually connects with, well, a couple of stories, actually. One is the fact that the mosque that good old Jihad al-Shami, however you say his name, went to in Manchester had already been reported for anti-Semitism. The other is a story about the Taliban, who have been flogging fake death threats to would-be asylum seekers. For 40 quid, you get a basic, we're watching your social media behave. For 200 quid, you're going to be killed. And then these people come over to Britain and say, oh, look, the regime is after me. What I want to ask you about is back in the day when I was in Mendoza Towers, there was a huge amount of conversation at that point about the domestic terror threat. It very much preoccupied the minds of Brits on a regular basis. We had the sort of warning light system, red, amber, green, something like that, or threat levels. And it seems to me now that there's almost become a lackadaisical approach to the terror threats in this country. You've got in Italy, Giorgia Meloni saying we need to understand the provenance of funding for mosques. They need to be monitored, as do religious institutions. And yet in Britain, it's almost like there's a shrug of the shoulders and like, oh, well, never mind. And all the while, you've got the Afghan scheme. We've already had 100,000 in 2022, 27,000 coming now, plus family members. And you find out this is going on and you think, surely, of that number, at least, even if just, 1% of that number happen to be would-be jihadists, that's already a lot of jihadists we're allowing into this country. How perilous is the situation today?
Well, so you raise a lot of interesting points that can all be tied together, actually. It's interesting that you've brought them up in that way. So the first point to note is, why have we become sort of blasé about the terror threat? Because thankfully, until last Thursday, we hadn't had any instance of terrorism for many years. Why? The security services had got lucky on every single occasion. I mean, luck, matched by skill, matched by intelligence, sort of backed by the sort of ability to shut down the threats. But it's not that there have been no threats going on. I mean, MI5 told us last year, they told us there are extreme numbers of threats happening. We've seen even states getting involved in some of these threats, and we see that that 75% of those on that watch list that MI5 are watching are from a radical Muslim background. So it's quite clear that there are significant threats and dangers on a daily basis in the UK that we aren't cognizant of because the security service have done such a good job and have also been blessed with immense luck. That doesn't mean, of course, at any given moment we won't have an attack. The likelihood is, given the numbers of people out there, that this is around the corner. And unfortunately, what tends to wake people up is a successful attack in that way. And then you've added in, of course, the idea of, we don't know who's coming into this country.
Right.
And we don't. We just don't know. And so that you could very well have a number of jihadist sympathizers emerging through the method that you've just highlighted, and we would have not a clue who they were.
Right. And what worries me is now they're being dispersed into HMOs. It's one thing if you're in a hotel sitting there trying to make a sort of a bomb vest or something. You might at least have a degree of eyes on, all of a sudden the package arrives from Amazon full of, screws or something and the online order of fertilizer. When you start putting people in these HMOs dotted around different communities, I can't see how these people can be effectively monitored as to what they get up to. It just seems to me so dangerous. And there's a woman that I follow called Sarah Adams. She's a former CIA agent. She's now a US government security advisor, specialist on Benghazi. And she's been warning for a long time. She knows Al-Qaeda better than anyone. She says Al-Qaeda is now Al-Qaeda 2.0. It's being run by bin Laden's son, who at one point everyone thought was killed, but actually he's not. They've teamed up with ISIS. They're even now unified with Iran. They've got more money than ever before. And she thinks, in all honesty, that the next big attack will be on soil, and it will be coordinated mass casualty events like multiple October the 7th in towns and cities across the West. And she actually was warning the other day that this is due to take place as early as December. And when I read things like that and I look at her credentials and I think she's not a nutcase, she's advising the US government. And then I see what went on as soon as there was the attack in the synagogue. All the mosques and all the synagogues in New York went into lockdown. We had an SAS helicopter in the sky, and I'm beginning to think that actually a lot of people have woken up that this could technically be the case.
Well, look, I don't know anything about I've not seen what she said, so I can't comment on that. But of course there are fears, and we've seen in the past with attacks in the West, with the Bataclan, sort of attacks in France, which were rolling, of course, and indeed, the Mumbai attacks, which were rolling, not in the West, but nonetheless that happened. And you all have perhaps picked up, Alex, that there was a case of 2 people currently on trial. So we can't really speak much about it, but I can go on what's reported. That apparently in this trial, they were caught trying to import or get guns and ammunition that would have been used in a similar style attack. So the reality here is that we do face the fear of a mass casualty rolling style attack. It's certainly possible. To do that does require some degree of coordination, and so far our security services have proven well ahead of the criminals and the terrorists and extremists who are doing these things to stop them. Can it continue there? That's a question. At some point, they have to get lucky once, right? And that's when the problem starts.
Right, and I don't understand why governments aren't actually declaring the level of illegal immigration an issue of national security based upon the sort of things we're talking about, and actually using that in a way to change legislation to make sure that we can do the utmost possible so we're not letting in would-be jihadists from around the world. Why is successive governments not doing this?
Well, so the sad fact, of course, is that much of the terrorism that occurs here, not all, but much, is by homegrown terrorists, people who are British citizens or who've come here legally. So we have to remember that is part of the problem. But on the illegal migration front, I quite agree with you. Why is it that we don't know who's coming and we don't know their records? We've had examples of Hamas operatives coming in here in the last year, and nobody knew until they were exposed because of their social media as to who they were. So in reality, yes, there needs to be a tougher focus. I suspect that why, of course, people haven't done that is because they're worried about the implications in the courts and by the activist judges and by the ECHR and such like. And so we know how to resolve that, don't we? We've got to get ourselves out of this legal chaos that means that we can't keep the country safe because we're so busy following laws that judges are interpreting in certain ways. It's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. It's always great catching up with you, Alan. Fantastic to have you back on the programme.